get our main verse, Joshua 4 through 7.
Then Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the children of Israel, one man from every tribe. And Joshua said to them, "Cross over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and each one of you take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, that this may be a sign among you when your children ask in time to come, saying, 'What do these stones mean to you?' Then you shall answer them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. And these stones shall be for a memorial to the children of Israel forever."
Okay, this is where the title comes from, memorial stones. They erected these stones so they could look back and remember and then line up with. So we're going to move on today. Before I start today's lesson, I just want to, just by way of actual introduction, I did a sermon a number of years ago, I don't remember how many years, probably maybe 10 years ago, called The Heavenly Vision, in which it actually was in one sermon kind of giving a history of some main points of our vision and where it came from. When I did that, I got such a good response. I began thinking about what I would like to do in the future. And the Bible is an honest book. It doesn't just give us bright stories, happy stories. It actually tells dark stories. It tells us trouble, failures, and those are also for our lesson. At that time, I said, maybe I would like to do a sermon, and I actually started jotting some notes called Dark Stories, but I couldn't see how I would do a whole sermon on that, so I put it aside. But I'm able now, today is going to be one of the dark stories in our history as a church and as our fellowship. It's very important for you to understand even dark moments in our history. So today we are going to cover what we call the split of 1990, and that's what we're going to be looking at. December of 1989, we were having breakfast one morning after prayer. My father and I, we had a very good relationship, but Dad was clearly not himself. He was irritable. He was snappy. He was very rude to me personally, that was not normal. My first reaction, it ticked me off, and I was angry. I went home like, what the heck is his problem? I don't know what I've done to cause this. But I'm not one to stew. I'm not one that stuffs and hides it. So I got home, started to tell Lisa, I said, I'm going to go ask Dad, what's wrong? I drove to the house and said, you weren't yourself. You're very rude. What's the problem? Did I do something? And he just handed me a letter, and he said, read this. I read the letter, and the letter was from the second man that was ever planted out of our fellowship. By this time, he's one of the leaders of our fellowship, conference preacher. He was perhaps the closest man relationally out of all of the pastors in the fellowship. The essence of the letter, it was informing Pastor Mitchell that he was leaving the fellowship, that he was going to resign, and not only was he leaving the fellowship and taking his church out of the fellowship, he was intending on all of his associated churches. They were also going to leave the fellowship, and the reasoning that he gave was the principle of church tithe. I explained in previous lessons that we believe in tithing personally. I tithe. I ask you to tithe. But also we have churches tithe. Churches that we send out tithe back to us. That's how we fund world evangelism primarily. And so what that meant is that every church we planted, they tithe 10%. Then if they planted a church, they would tithe 5% to them and 5% to us. And so this man was saying he didn't agree with that, so he's leaving the fellowship. I'll never forget the look on Dad's face. He was absolutely stunned. This letter had blitzed him. for a number of reasons. The first reason was this man, as I said, he was very close to him. They talked all the time. Not one time had the man ever said a word about this. He had never complained. He had never asked a question. No discussion, nothing. He's just out of the blue, I'm out of here. And they're like, how could you, if something upsets you so much you're going to leave, how could you leave without discussing it? That, of course, is biblical. You talk, Matthew 18. You go to your brother, you try to talk it out if you feel offended. The second reason why Dad was so stunned is that this man was relationally so close. He treated him like a spiritual son. They had a very good relationship. So, of course, there was a personal betrayal. How could he do that to me? But the third reason is Dad said he is leaving our fellowship to go out into the wider church world. And Dad said, I've been there. I've been trying to escape it. He wants to go back to that. He's like, that's insane that anybody could want to do that. At this time, Dad thought this was isolated simply to this one man. And he knew him to be emotional at times. He had emotional reactions. So he thought maybe he's just, upset, emotional. So he said, if we could sit down and talk about it, right? Reasonable people, if there's goodwill, you want to talk things through and work it out. And so, if you're reasonable, you think other people are reasonable. That's how Dad viewed it. So he called the man and said, it doesn't make sense. You're going to leave, and we've never even discussed it. Dad said, look, if genuinely we're not doing something that's correct, let's discuss it. If something needs to be changed, then let's change it. That's December of 1989. I explained to you every January we have what we call leadership meetings. Leadership is leaders from, now it's around the world, but leaders come and we meet together for 2 days before the January conference, and we discuss issues, we discuss problems, we form policy if it needs to be, and whatever. So Dad got him to agree, isn't the logical place, we're having leadership in a few weeks, why don't you just wait? Let's come and discuss it, and if we need to make changes, we will. So the man agreed, and that is what we do. January of 1990, we were set to meet. Now, what Dad was unaware of at that point in time was it wasn't just this man. There were two main ringleaders who were organizing a rebellion against Pastor Mitchell. And what he didn't realize is that for 18 months to 2 years, these two main ringleaders, everywhere they went, had been planting seeds of rebellion, had been trying to enlist other people in rebellion. Now, I'm sorry, I have to use, Dad coined a term for this. It's crude, but these are his words, so we'll blame him. You can talk to him in heaven. Dad called this process, what they'd been doing for 18 months to 2 years, he called it turd fishing. And what they would do is they would drop a turd. If you don't know what that is, ask your mother when you get home. But in other words, they would drop something disgusting, a criticism, a complaint, just an off-the-wall comment to see if the person would bite. It was fishing. What they're literally doing is they were searching for offense or rebellion in people. He had no idea they had been doing this for 18 months to 2 years. They actually identified anybody they knew was disciplined. If a pastor had been in false doctrine, immorality, anything, and had come under discipline, they would target them. If there was ever a problem, they were deliberately finding these people. They were finding people who might have a conflict or might be upset, because this is how rebellion works. A person who is rebellious, they try to use offense as a means of enlisting other people to their side. This is actually a biblical principle. We see this in a man named Absalom. 2 Samuel 15, 2 through 4.
Now Absalom would rise early and stand beside the way to the gate. So it was, whenever anyone who had a lawsuit came to the king for a decision, that Absalom would call to him and say, "What city are you from?" And he would say, "Your servant is from such and such a tribe of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your case is good and right, but there is no deputy of the king to hear you." Moreover, Absalom would say, "Oh, that I were made judge on the land, and everyone who has any suit or cause would come to me, then I would give him justice."
Okay, this is exactly what Absalom was the original, what these two men had been doing for 2 years. What Absalom is doing, he's waiting at the gate. This is where people who had complaints were coming to see the king. So he's identifying people who are already upset. And what's the problem? Well, I don't think it's right. And Absalom here uses the language of concern. Oh, that's terrible. What happened to you? Man, if there was just somebody, because what he's actually saying here is the king doesn't really care. I care. That's what rebels always do. They always say, I care. It's just not fair, and that's what these men had been doing. It's not fair what Pastor Mitchell is doing. It's not fair what the fellowship is, and had been identifying it. Rebellion always uses the language of concern, but it's not concern for you. Rebellion is about pride, power, and bitterness. And we'll discuss this further. So we're now aiming for January. We're now going to have these meetings. In the meantime, Pastor Joe Campbell, at that time, was a missionary in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Because it's a Muslim nation, it's illegal, of course, to be a pastor there, a preacher there. So he's there under a tourist visa, which means every 90 days he has to leave the country for a few days in order to enter, get his visa renewed so he can be back. So he would go and preach for guys for a few days or a week and then come back. He went to preach for a man. Pastor Campbell has no idea this man, they had enlisted him, and he was fully on board with their plan of rebellion. When Joe steps off the plane, this man assumed that Joe Campbell also knew all about the grand plan of rebellion. The reason why, Joe Campbell had been saved under one of these men who was leading the rebellion. So the man assumed, if you're saved under that guy, you got to be in on it. So he blurts out their plan. They're going to come at conference and they're going to attack Pastor Mitchell and try to have him removed. So he called Pastor Mitchell. He said, I'm giving you a heads up. At the business meeting in January of 1990 during conference, they're going to come after you. They're going to attack you. And so this kind of revealed that this was not just a problem of one man who was upset. We held these leadership meetings the Thursday and Friday before the conference in January of 1990. We discussed the issue of the tithe. As I said previously, if you're an immediate church plant, that church would tithe 10% of regular income to Prescott. That's how we afford world evangelism. If they plant a church, then it would be 5 to the mother church, 5 to Prescott, and then it goes on down 5 and 5. So we noted that our fellowship had grown. We now had a number of conference churches who are now planting internationally. And so there actually was some logic. So what we agreed to is we said, let's change it. If you are a conference church, your immediate churches will no longer send 5% beyond you to Prescott or the mother church. Instead, every immediate church plant will tithe 10%. Prescott will get nothing. In other words, Prescott is not a huge, pyramid scheme that everybody, we get money. There are thousands that we get nothing from them. So we agreed that that would make it affordable for world evangelism. We all voted on it, and we agreed to do that. That was after discussion. That's what we do. We discuss, and then we vote on it. At the end of the meeting, they then turned to the man who said he was leaving because of the issue of the tithe. We just resolved it. Okay? You said that's what you wanted. Now remember, when I talked, I told you about the original strategy or complaint that they had was Pastor Mitchell's not into the supernatural. July of 1989, it's a healing crusade. Pastor Mitchell's praying for the sick, so that one, okay, then we can't say that. Now it's the tithe. We just resolved it. And they asked him, so what are you going to do? And he said, I'm sticking to my letter. I'm still leaving the fellowship. So then the tithe wasn't really the issue. And this is what you learn. Rebels will tell you, this is why I cannot stay any longer. But it doesn't really matter what you say. There's another agenda at work, and so he says that he is going to leave. These men who were in rebellion, they had three main aims. There were three possible outcomes in their mind coming into conference. First, and the most preferable to them was, if we can get Pastor Mitchell to resign and replace him. So what they wanted was a coup. We want a new king. Let's get rid of. That was the most preferable outcome that they wanted. Acts 20, verse 30.
Also from among yourselves men will rise up, speaking perverse things to draw away the disciples after themselves.
Okay, the Apostle Paul in the New Testament, he said this is in human nature. So they'll say it's about this or it's about that. The real issue, it's power. So now what these men were reaching, not only in their own immediate disciples, they're telling other people, trying to enlist them so that we have the power. So goal number one, if we attack Pastor Mitchell and get him to be so discouraged that he quits, then I can be king. If that doesn't work, goal number two is, if Pastor Mitchell won't quit, if he won't resign, let's get him to release all churches. In other words, dissolve the fellowship. By that time, we had 600 churches. We had started planting churches from 1973. So in 17 years, we now have 600 churches. Plus, we had Praise Chapel and New Harvest. They were affiliated with us. I'm not including them in the 600. So what they wanted was for Pastor Mitchell to make an announcement. Everybody, there is no more fellowship. You're on your own. You don't have to come. You don't have to tithe. You don't have to fellowship. You don't have to have everybody do what's right in your own eyes. And that worked really well in the book of Judges, didn't it? If you're not a Bible reader, I'm being sarcastic there. It's the book of Judges shows what happens when people do what's right in their own eyes. It's a disaster. If they couldn't get Pastor Mitchell to resign, or if they couldn't get him to release and dissolve the whole fellowship, number three was the Sunday after conference, then all those who were in on this plot, we will all stand up Sunday morning and announce we're leaving the fellowship. And so that was goal number three there. Here is where, even though this is a dark tale, I'm telling you this to show you how God is at work. So, all of these men know the plan. right? We're going to attack, see if we can get him to resign. If not, get him to release. If we won't do that, Sunday after conference, then announce to your church, we're leaving the fellowship. The man who took Joe Campbell's church in Chandler got his wires crossed. I believe God confused him. He made a mistake, and the Sunday before conference, he announced to his church, we're leaving the fellowship. We're no longer in the fellowship. Here's a problem with rebels. Rebellion is based on pride, and every rebel thinks everyone agrees with me. Because I feel something strongly, everybody feels it too. So and in his mind, he had taken a church that he didn't build. And he thinks, we're leaving the fellowship. So in other words, we're having nothing to do with Pastor Campbell, who built the church. Nothing to do with Pastor Mitchell, the whole fellowship. And he thinks the whole church will go, yeah, we're... And people said, what? So immediately when he did that, people started pushing back. Why are you doing this? They started calling Pastor Campbell, calling Pastor Mitchell, and they began to push back. This man, to his shock, because every rebel is a legend in his own mind. They all think they're the most brilliant people in the world, and everybody agrees with me. And people said, no way, we're not going with you. And it spooked that man, but this was very helpful. That was God causing that to come out. January 1990, we began from Monday night. I want to tell you, it was heavy vibes, heavy atmosphere. So you have all those who are in on the plot, they are pulling. People have nothing to do with them. They're dumping on them and telling them we're leaving the fellowship and you should leave too. Their plan, we normally have our business meetings on Wednesday, but the vibes were so thick. I said to Dad, I was the assistant at the time, I said to Dad, why wait? Let's get it over with. If it's got to be a fight, let's have it tomorrow. Let's do it on Tuesday. So we did. We had it a day early. Some of the guys I've talked to, they say it's puzzling. We did it on Tuesday. That was because I said, let's get this over with because it's going to be ugly. And so we did. Tuesday after the morning seminars, we had a business meeting, and I want to tell you, it was ugly. It was vicious. These men were wicked men. Dad began by explaining that there were some men that were planning on leaving the fellowship based on the principle of the tithe. He explained that we addressed that issue. We made some changes to do that. He also, my father, humbled himself. He said, look, if I have done anything to offend any of you, to hurt you, I apologize. I'll try to make it right. That was in his heart. But in the meantime, numbers of men had come forward telling what had been going on. Now we realize this has been going on for up to 2 years. We had people that came and people had nothing to do with them. We're leaving the fellowship. You need to come with us. And so they're telling Pastor Mitchell that. One of the main things that happened, Vic Eason, Wilma's late husband, they had left a church in Rancho Cucamonga. The man who took over that church was one of the main ringleaders, had been poisoning and planning to leave it. And so it was clear. So Pastor Mitchell, after explaining that we're addressing the issue, after apologizing, but he called it out. He said, this is rebellion. And these men, he called out some of them by name and had them, told them and said, this is what's happening. It's a rebellion. Had a couple of men testify of what had been said to them, that rebellion had been sown for quite some time. Then Dad had microphones and he allowed anybody to speak. I don't think he ever did this again. This is not a good plan. Any pastor that's watching this, if you're going through rebellion, please never give anybody a microphone in a public meeting. Not a wise move. This was, it was ugly. One man in particular led the attack on Pastor Mitchell. He began ranting and raving. He coincidentally, when I told you the original time when Pastor Mitchell went to Australia and the guy who tried to take us in another direction, the pastor of Prescott, had to be replaced. Another man who was his big ally in taking us in a new direction was the man absolutely attacking. Finally, Dad had to shut him down, shut his microphone off. We've had enough. And so he started yelling, making a scene. Numbers of men were attacking my father, and Dad would not defend himself. He wasn't trying to attack them back. The meeting ended essentially without resolution. There was no resolution to it. It just kind of, we've talked all we can talk, meeting is dismissed. Now, out of this, my father was absolutely blitzed by this. You have to understand, he comes from the church world. Churches split all the time. Fellowship split. We had never had a split. That had never happened. We had never had pastors leave before. So my father was blitzed. He met with some leaders in the basement of the old church in Ruth Street. And Dad, his brain, this is what happens in rebellion. Your mind is like scrambled eggs. And so Dad said, maybe I will just release everyone. And I'm going to tell you, the fellowship hung in the balance at that moment. And I thank God there were a number of leaders. They said, no, Pastor Mitchell, we cannot. We have to stick together. And so their encouragement kind of helped my dad think clearly, and Dad agreed. So my dad made a decision. We are going to turn to the man who said he was leaving because of the issue of the tithe. We just resolved it. Okay, you said that's what you wanted. Now remember, when I talked, I told you about the original strategy or complaint that they had was Pastor Mitchell's not into the supernatural. July of 1989, it's a healing crusade. Pastor Mitchell's praying for the sick, so that one, okay, then we can't say that. Now it's the tithe. We just resolved it. And they asked him, so what are you going to do? And he said, I'm sticking to my letter. I'm still leaving the fellowship. So then the tithe solved it. And they asked him, so what are you going to do? And he said, I'm sticking to my letter. I'm still leaving the fellowship. So then the tithe wasn't really the issue. And this is what you learn. Rebels will tell you, this is why I cannot stay any longer. But it doesn't really matter what you say. There's another agenda at work. And so he says that he is going to leave. These men who were in rebellion, they had three main aims. There were three possible outcomes in their mind coming into conference. First, and the most preferable to them was, if we can get Pastor Mitchell to resign and replace him. So what they wanted was a coup. We want a new king. Let's get rid of. That was the most preferable outcome that they wanted. Acts 20, verse 30.
Also from among yourselves men will rise up, speaking perverse things to draw away the disciples after themselves.
Okay, the Apostle Paul in the New Testament, he said this is in human nature. So they'll say it's about this or it's about that. The real issue, it's power. So now what these men were reaching not only in their own immediate disciples, they're telling other people, trying to enlist them so that we have the power. So goal number one, if we attack Pastor Mitchell and get him
to be so discouraged that he quits, then I can be king. If that doesn't work, goal number 2 is, if Pastor Mitchell won't quit, if he won't resign, let's get him to release all churches. In other words, dissolve the fellowship. By that time, we had 600 churches. Plus, we had Praise Chapel and New Harvest. They were affiliated with us. I'm not including them in the 600. So what they wanted was for Pastor Mitchell to make an announcement. Everybody, there is no more fellowship. You're on your own. You don't have to come. You don't have to tithe. You don't have to fellowship. You don't have to have everybody do what's right in your own eyes. And that worked really well in the book of Judges, didn't it? If you're not a Bible reader, I'm being sarcastic there. It's the book of Judges shows what happens when people do what's right in their own eyes. It's a disaster. If they couldn't get Pastor Mitchell to resign, or if they couldn't get him to release and dissolve the whole fellowship, number 3 was the Sunday after conference, then all those who were in on this plot, we will all stand up Sunday morning and announce we're leaving the fellowship. And so that was goal number 3 there. Here is where, even though this is a dark of what had been said to them, that rebellion had been sown for quite some time, then Dad had microphones and he allowed anybody to speak. We are going to go on as a fellowship even if those men leave. If they leave, so be it. God gave us a vision. It works. We're not changing. That was a very powerful moment. I want you to understand something about my father. My father was a Golden Gloves boxer, okay? Dad knew how to fight. And so instinctively, at crucial moments in time, you understand when someone is pounding you in the face, don't stand there, punch back. That's how Dad views life sometimes, spiritually. And so he said, and you have to understand how things are teetering on the edge. Dad said, we are going to plant churches. Financially, we didn't know what was going to happen. It's incredible. In the midst of that, on Thursday night, my father planted 4 international churches. Okay, he is punching back. Plus, on Friday night, we planted another 6 in the U.S. From our church alone, we planted 3 couples from Prescott. I think we have a photo. Go on there. Here, this is Thursday night. You see John Overson. That's George and Irish Shields, Jim and Debbie Duran, a man named Peter Turco. So 4 international churches. That was Dad's attitude. Is we have a vision, and that's Dad's spirit. You stick it in your eye, we're going to keep on doing what we're doing. Okay? Because that was Dad's spirit. So, back to the 2 main ringleaders now. I told you, originally there were 2 leaders. They were the ones who were stirring this. The one man who originally wrote the letter said, I'm leaving. He didn't come to conference, but what we found out later on, he did come to Prescott. He secretly got himself a hotel because in his insane, rebellious mind, filled with pride, he was certain that everybody was going to be outraged and say, what? He's leaving? Let's get rid of Pastor Mitchell and we're going to crown him king. So he's waiting by the phone in his hotel room for the call to be crowned king. That's delusional. Okay, but that's him. The other ringleader of rebellion did come to conference, spent the week pulling on people, trying to rally people to get them to leave. He preached. My father actually let him preach, which is amazing when I look back on it. He preached a message that seriously angered people because he put it, don't worry about what's happening. He said, Mom and Dad are just having a fight. And so there were people that heard that. It made them very angry. Number 1, we're not children, okay? Number 2, we know who Dad is. You definitely are not our mother. How dare you think you're going to speak and determine anything in our lives? But again, in his pride, that's how he viewed himself. Men confronted him what are you going to do? Are you going to leave the fellowship? And he promised, I will not leave the fellowship. Went home and immediately left the fellowship. So then they challenged, we learned something. You need to learn something about rebels. Rebels lie. They have an agenda to destroy. They'll lie. They challenged, they said, you're a liar. You swore. And I like this. He said, well, it was like Jephthah. It was a rash vow. And that was how he excused his lie. So this is a dark tale because in the days and weeks after that conference, out of 600 churches, we lost 100 churches. Okay, that was a huge, huge blow at that moment in time. Rebellion is selfish. They'll tell you how much they care, but these men, we're out of here. Many of them had missionaries on the field. They're in foreign countries. They simply called them up and said, we're leaving the fellowship. We got no money. See you later. Make your own way home. That's wicked. That's evil. And so here's my father's heart. He stepped in, men that were not his, they weren't from Prescott. These men that were stranded in foreign countries and had no money to get home, my father sent money from the Prescott church to get them home, knowing full well, I think almost all of them had been poisoned. They weren't going to stay with us. He wasn't doing this because he's going to get something. He just said, that's not right. You can't treat people like that. And so Dad stepped in and gave them money to get home. At that moment in time in the Prescott church, we were running 30,000 in the hole every month. This is in 1990. What that means is we were having to spend 30,000 a month more than our income just to survive because of these men leaving. Of course, they're not giving or losing 100 churches. Okay, so for over a year after the split, as my father would travel around preaching, he would insist, do not give me any money. Instead, I want you to take an offering for world evangelism. And my dad took no money for over a year. He did this just raising money so that we could support missionaries on the field, and that's the heart that we had. Now, I want to say something to you that is very important about this. Rebellion is evil. Okay, rebellion, some people, you think, well, you know, people left the fellowship, but it's like they were McDonald's, they've swapped brand, now they're Burger King. No. Rebellion is evil. Now, there are people who just say, look, this is not for me. I want to do something else. You want to go and do something? God bless you. Go ahead. But these are men who want to steal investment. These are men who now want to reach back and they want to infect other people and get them to leave. Listen to me. Wherever there is rebellion, people wind up in hell. There are people burning in hell today because of the wickedness of those men. Okay, you need to understand this. Think about some of the consequences. We lost 100 churches. All right. 2 of those were conference centers. That meant that every 6 months, I think most of them had conferences every 6 months or once a year. They had a conference. They were launching churches. We are all about evangelism. I'm not trying to drain other churches that come to our church. We want sinners. So every church that is planted means that there are people witnessing, evangelizing, saving people from hell. Those people aborted that. So now, you know that thing about any man can count the seeds in an apple, but only God can count the apples in a seed? I can tell you how many churches we lost, 100. I can tell you we lost 2 conference centers initially. Only God can calculate how many people should have been saved if those men had stayed doing right. And I'm telling you, there are people burning in hell today because these men, pride, I want to be king, power, I want other people to follow me, or bitterness, I'm mad, so you should be mad too. And they don't care. It was an ugly, ugly period after this. For a while, my dad used to keep track. Out of the 100 pastors that left, 60 of them no longer in the ministry. Numbers of those men wound up getting divorced. Many of them saw destruction in their own children. You had families split down the middle. You saw them pull on. But this is why rebellion is wicked. You have people that they're happy serving God. They don't have a beef. They don't have a problem. But a rebel gets in their ear. Do you know what they said to me? Do you know what they did to me? It's not. And now you get people who are destabilized. So what happens in rebellion, there are people, they don't just go on, okay, I'll swap churches and go on serving God. Instead, they backslide. They go back to sin. Rebels don't care. You backslide, all they care is, see, there are other people that agree with me. They left the church. They backslid, they're on their way to hell. They don't care. You destabilize them, they're divorced today. They agreed with me. That rebellion is evil. It is not a minor thing. It is wicked. Proverbs 6, verse 16 and verse 19.
These 6 things the Lord hates. Yes, 7 are an abomination to him. A false witness who speaks lies, and one who sows discord among brethren.
Okay, this is how rebellion operates. This is what Absalom did, sowing discord. Here, I'm dropping it on you. I'm mad. I don't agree. Therefore, I want you to disagree. What does the Bible say? How does God view that? The Bible says God hates that. That is wicked. I've seen precious new converts that now their brains are scrambled and they go back to sin because a rebel wasn't happy with something. 1 Samuel 15, 23.
For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he also has rejected you from being king.
Okay, look at this. This is what rebellion is like. Let's take the second part. Stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. That's why we can say to the man, you said your problem was tithe. We resolved the tithe, but it doesn't fix it because it's a stubborn spirit. You're smarter than everybody in the whole fellowship. Yes, I'm right. That's just stubbornness. But the Bible says rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. There probably are people sitting here or watching online. You've had someone along the line, they've gotten in your ear. They've started telling you, why do you think they're doing that? And I don't agree, and it's not fair, and that's mean. And you've never been the same. I'm confused. You're looking at the church that got you saved differently. You're looking at the fellowship you owe your life to differently. Because the Bible says it's supernatural. It's a spirit. In the same way, witchcraft is manipulating other people's will, bending them to your will. That's what rebellion does. This was pre-internet. 1990 was pre-internet. Now, of course, you can get a troll. He can't find his butt with both hands at a map, but now he can go online, tell why the fellowship is evil and pastors are evil, but nonetheless. Romans 16, 17.
Now I urge you, brethren, note those who cause division and offenses, contrary to the doctrine which you learned, and avoid them.
Okay, so this is biblical. What do you do if someone is causing division and offense? They got a problem, now they want you to be mad like they're mad. What does the Bible say? Well, they're my friends. But the Bible says you should note them and avoid them. Because if you don't, I've told people 100% of anybody who listens to a rebel doesn't make it, and you're not going to be the first. I've had to make hard stands. I've made stands against friends. I love you. We have a history. You're in rebellion. You're attacking my fellowship, my pastor. No, our relationship just changed. I've had to stand against family because that's Bible. It's not a personal opinion. It's Bible, because if you don't, you won't survive. It's very, very simple. In the aftermath of this, I said my dad's initial reaction was punch back, we're going to plant churches, but privately, my dad was extremely discouraged. He began thinking about this. He had poured his life into men to help them. His definition of discipleship is a sincere desire to help somebody else find their destiny. He poured money and time and effort and love. So my dad began to think, what good does it do to pour your life into men and plant churches if later on they violate you and abandon you and leave? And so my dad privately, he didn't say this publicly, but privately, he said, you know what? I'm not going to plant churches anymore. But remember, I've been showing you all along the line my dad's Bible. My dad had a relationship with God. Wayman Mitchell, my father, founder of our fellowship, pastor of this church for many years, he had a relationship with God, and one day in prayer and Bible reading, God spoke to him and said, you do what I told you to do, and you leave the results with me. And so my dad said, yes, Lord. And so he agreed. He said when he made that decision, that cloud lifted off of him, and he said, we are going on the vision that God gave of evangelism of the lost, discipleship, training workers to become pastors, missionaries, not in Bible school, but in a local congregation, planting churches domestically and international church planting missions. He said, that's our vision. We are never stopping. And we're going to keep on doing that. I have one final photo from my dad's Bible. This is from my dad's Bible in January of 1990. First of all, in this verse, this is from Numbers 23, but the Lord thy God turned the curse into a blessing unto you, because the Lord your God loved you. You shall not seek their peace nor their prosperity all their days forever. January of 1990, my dad wrote the names of the two main ringleaders. And this is what God spoke, is he said, God is going to turn their curse into a blessing. I'm going to leave them with God, and we're going to believe God to turn it into a blessing. And that is exactly what God did, is that we went on of those, I told you the numbers of the churches. One of those ringleaders, his church doesn't exist today. Gone, which is a tragedy. Church planting center, actually another one in Flagstaff, is another church planting center, was destroyed. Gone, but we went on. And then the third ringleader in Colorado Springs, he went on after a fashion, but greatly diminished from what he was with us. But we said, that's on you. We're not quitting. We're going on with God. And that is why today we now are past the 3,500 mark in churches, because God honors. Thank God. So you're not going to understand our fellowship unless you understand episodes like that. But you see the hand of God at work. You see a man who got the date wrong in which day we're leaving. You got a man who blurted the plan out when he shouldn't have done that and alerted Joe Campbell. But I tell you that because this is a work of God. It's not a work of man. As Pastor Mitchell said over and over again, if it is a work of God, then God is going to keep us. He has preserved us, and we have gone on. And those men, I don't begrudge them. If they do anything else for God, great. But you did a great deal of damage that someday you're going to speak to God, and I think there'll be slapping involved, okay? I don't think you're going to stand before God, and God can calculate how many people wound up in hell and how many people lost their destiny. It's not my business to say, are they saved? That's not my business. I'm not God. But God is. And so I leave them to God. We are going to continue. I want you to bow your heads just for a moment. And no doubt there are people watching. You could do this as well. One of the ugly things about rebellion's eternal. It never stops in one sense. You, from time to time, have people in churches. It moves through fellowships. There are people that are here that you have had someone in your ear, and they've told you of their complaint, their beef. I don't agree. It's not fair. Whatever it was. Some of them were filled with pride. They wanted to be king. Some of them are filled with pride. They think they can pass judgment on a whole fellowship, which is crazy. Others are just bitter, and they want you to be bitter with them. But while I was speaking, some of you, you have been deeply affected by words. You have never looked at the church the same. You've never looked at your pastor the same. Some of you you wrestle with confusion. And while I was teaching, God says, this is why. Because rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. I'm going to lead you in a prayer. I want you to say this out loud. I want you to say, Father God, I want to do your will, and I recognize words of rebellion that have been spoken. I reject those words. I break the power of them. I cast it out of my mind and my heart. I will do the will of God. I thank you for what you have chosen in my life, and I agree with it. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's praise God together right now. God, we thank you for your goodness.